In 1381, tax officials in England tried to do something very simple: count adults, collect a poll tax, and send the money upward. On paper, this was administration. In the villages, it felt like a hand reaching through the door. The tax landed on a country already strained by war, labor laws, and the long aftershock of plague. Then the paperwork met a crowd, and the crowd moved toward London. This is the strange thing about taxes. They can look boring right up until people decide they are not. This is the history of taxes. So why does a receipt have this much power? To answer that, we have to go much further back than income forms and deadline panic. Back to clay. In ancient Mesopotamia, some of the earliest writing was not poetry, law, or royal confession. It was bookkeeping. Scribes pressed marks into soft clay to track things like bread and beer rations, which is a humbling origin story for civilization, but an honest one. Before a state can reliably collect grain, assign labor, or move supplies, it needs memory that does not die with the person remembering. A mark in clay made obligation portable. It could say, this many animals, this much grain, this much work, this much owed. Taxes did not invent writing by themselves. But taxation belongs to the same administrative world that made writing useful. Because power has a problem, it can only take reliably from what it can see. Early states taxed the visible. Fields could be measured, harvests could be counted, animals could be listed, labor could be demanded. Tax was not always money. Sometimes it was grain in a storehouse, days on a road crew, goods at a river crossing, or service owed to someone higher up the chain. The important thing was not the coin, it was the count. Once rulers learned to count, conquest became something more than an army on a road. It became a ledger. In 1086, William the Conqueror had a problem many conquerors eventually discover. Taking a kingdom is dramatic. Running one is paperwork. So William ordered a great survey of England. Officials asked who held the land, who had held it before, how it was used, what it was worth, and what it owed. The result was Domesday Book. It was not a census of ordinary people in the modern sense. It was a survey of landed property, value, resources, and obligation. In other words, the conquest had become searchable. That is the dry genius of tax records. They turn a landscape into questions. How many plows? How much meadow? How many mills? Who owes what? A kingdom that can answer those questions can govern differently from a kingdom that guesses. But records create another problem. If the government says you paid, how do you prove it? In medieval England, one answer was a stick. Exchequer tally sticks were notched to record an amount, then split lengthwise. One half stayed with the government, the other half went to the person who had paid or owed. Later, the two halves could be matched together. It was a receipt you could literally break in half, which is both elegant and extremely medieval. The system lasted so long that when old tally sticks were finally burned in 1834, the fire helped destroy much of the old Palace of Westminster. Few accounting systems get that dramatic a retirement party. But even a good receipt cannot solve the oldest tax problem. Who gets to ask? Medieval kings needed revenue, especially for war. Powerful subjects wanted limits on arbitrary demands. Magna Carta was not modern democracy, and it was not written for everyone. It was a baronial document born from crisis. But one of its lasting political ideas was that certain taxes needed common counsel. In plain language, even kings could be told, not like that. Taxes help make representative institutions matter because someone had to approve the bill. And when approval felt fake, unfair, or forced, the receipt could become evidence against the ruler. Which brings us back to 1381. England's poll tax was dangerous because it counted people directly. Not land, not windows, not a shipment of wool. People. A poll tax turns bodies into entries, And in 1381, those entries landed in a society already angry about wages, status, and war. The Peasants' Revolt was not caused by one form alone. History is rarely that tidy, no matter how hard the clerks try. But the tax was the spark because it made the system visible at the level of the household. The state saw a list. The crowd saw a line crossed. That tension never really goes away. Taxes do not only collect from the world, they change the world they measure. Sometimes governments learn the opposite lesson. If people hate being counted directly, tax something next to them. By the 18th century, British taxation included duties on everyday goods: candles, leather, beer, soap, starch, and plenty more. These were indirect taxes. The trader might hand over the money, but the buyer still felt it folded quietly into the price. This is one reason indirect taxes survive so well. A tax hidden in a bar of soap is less dramatic than an official at the door. But hidden does not mean harmless, and visible does not mean fair. In 1696, England introduced a tax based partly on windows. The idea had a certain administrative charm. Richer houses probably had more windows, and windows are easier to count than income. The house, unfortunately, noticed. To reduce the bill, some owners blocked or bricked up windows. A tax meant to estimate wealth had changed architecture, light, and air. That is one of the oddest truths about taxes. They are never just measurements. They are instructions people try to answer. Count windows, and windows disappear. Count imports, and trade routes bend. Count income, and privacy starts arguing with the state. That last argument became especially modern in Britain in 1799. War with revolutionary France had made ordinary taxes, and borrowing feel insufficient. William Pitt introduced a tax on incomes. The highest incomes paid 10%, and lower incomes paid less or nothing. The tax was unpopular, not only because people disliked paying it. That part, historically, has enjoyed excellent continuity. It was unpopular because it asked private financial life to become visible. A window tax counted what a passerby could see from the street. An excise duty could hide inside the things people bought. An income tax asked what only you, your employer, your accounts, and eventually the government might know. That is a different kind of power. The modern tax form feels dull because the drama has become routine. But inside it is an old question. What can the state see? Who agreed that it could see it? And what happens if the answer feels wrong? Taxes built more than treasuries. They built archives, surveys, offices, parliaments, arguments, loopholes, and very occasionally, bricked up windows. They paid for armies and roads, but also created the records that let governments know where armies and roads could be demanded. A tax receipt looks small because it is designed to. A little clay tablet, a page in a book, a split stick, a line on a form. But inside it is one of history's oldest arguments. Who counts, who pays, and who gets to say yes?